Hello there and welcome to the 6th episode of the Foxhole. This time around, I'll be taking a closer look at how games of different genres engage in challenges in different ways in different periods of our lives. My name is Foxhound, and without further dilly-dally, let's get started. Throughout my life, I've played and liked almost every genre out there, but I've noticed that I don't really do that anymore, that I've changed, that my taste in games has changed, that strategy games are now my favorite genre. When I was a kid, I remember playing Word Rescue, an educational platformer game that in addition to being fun, also happened to be a relevant learning tool that helped me learn English, which isn't my native language. I don't play that game anymore, and you might say, well, that's just a kid's game, so of course that's not appealing anymore. But I don't think it's that simple, because I used to play Jazz Jackrabbit as well, a cool to the core platformer with a badass soundtrack. That game, along with Tyrion, a sci-fi shoot-'em-up that I utterly love. Both are more adult in tone, and if I ever had to play a platformer or shoot-'em-up game again, those two would be my first pick, no contest. But I don't have to play them again, and so I don't. And I'm wondering why that is. Maybe we as kids and teenagers are more energetic or restless and have a harder time paying attention, which might make fast-paced action-filled games more enticing to us. Where as adults, we have learned to sit still, both literally and metaphorically. Learn to analyze and plan ahead, which are the cornerstones of many strategy games. But does that hypothesis really hold water? Let's visit a couple of racing games to find out. I really enjoyed the first generation of Need for Speed games, which spanned from 1994 to 2002. These were basic games about a single goal: finish first. The driving was solid, the cars were cool, the levels were awesome, and the entire package was just fun. Then came the second generation, starting out with Need for Speed Underground, which captured the Fast and the Furious vibe that lingered in pop culture at that time. The most prominent features that made this generation stand out was its emphasis on car customization. While there's a certain simplistic magic to just driving normal sports cars, I really enjoyed personalizing and souping up my car as well as the funky soundtrack. Underground marked the end of isolated levels and the coming of open-world cities, but it also brought something more sinister. That sinister thing? An Arcady driving feel. In my very own, very personal opinion, this would come to be an anchor around the feet of future titles. Cars could no longer take damage, and crashing into obstacles or other cars slowed you down way less than in previous games. This led to silly situations like ramming into the side skirts of a sharply curving road while using a turbo boost, with sparks lighting up the entire screen while you glided along effortlessly at full speed. It wrecked the immersion for me, and even worse, it just seemed so unnecessary. It failed to punish people for lousy driving, and instead encouraged them to constantly keep the gas pedal flat down, making them torpedo their way through whatever was in front of them. Contrast this to Race Driver Grid from 2008, which featured realistic handling and very impactful damage models. The number of drivers in the race was also much greater, which meant the total advantage of disabling one opponent by reckless driving was that much smaller. There was no tuning or turbo boosts, which meant even greater room for mastery of your driving skills. In Underground, those driving skills would be maxed out pretty fast, but in Grid you had to learn the feel of the car, how far you could push it, what strengths and weaknesses it had, etc. I realize my portrayal of Underground's skill requirement or lack thereof probably makes me sound like an elitist 13-year-old full of get good remarks. But getting good is not so simple, because there are several ways of being good at a game depending on the type of game, of course. In Grid, it's all about learning the physics of the game as a measuring stick for how late you can brake before corners, how to reach optimum apex, what effects driving over or into even the smallest obstacles could have, etc. All these things are about perfecting the skill for the game's core concept, which is driving. The way you improve in Underground, however, is learning when to torpedo someone in a corner to overtake them on the inside while forcing them out, or smash into them when they try to overtake you. Turbo boosts were often just used as a force multiplier for this exact method. In Underground, you could basically put your brain on autopilot, but in Grid, you were always on your toes, as even a minor slip-up could have dire consequences. That was also the reason why you would get such a huge jolt of adrenaline in Grid when flying down the sloped streets of San Francisco or the cobblestone roads of Milan with your opponent clinging onto your tailpipe inches behind you. Because you were constantly on the edge of blowing it all, constantly seeing how far you could push it, constantly being in a state of chaos. When you overtook an opponent and stole first place with a laser shot maneuver seconds before the finishing line and with a thundering soundtrack blasting in your ears, that elated feeling was and continues to be one of the most ecstatic ones I've had in a game. Bringing it back to my changing taste in games, racing games are all about being fast-paced and the diametrical opposite of a thinking man's strategy game like Civilization. So what gives? You could argue that waning quality standards and the homogenization of a given genre has made it entirely unattractive to play. That's certainly the case for me, to the point where I actually don't play first-person shooters anymore, or Ubisoft games. Maybe it was the depth of the skill ceiling that didn't matter as much to me when I was younger. After all, Underground was a fun game, but it was a different kind of fun that Grid delivered. Back when I was a kid, I recall how my mom would mostly play slower-paced casual games, such as puzzle games and even games like Word Rescue. When I asked her why, she said she felt stressed out when playing faster games and that she just wanted to relax. This made me chuckle in reference to episode 1, where I specifically mentioned stress as a deliberate tool in RTS games. But maybe that's it though. Maybe the stress of long work days, raising a family and dealing with life in general just creates such a mental overload where you just want to go home and play something simple, something familiar, something that caters to living an adult life. It sure makes sense to me, as there have been some periods in my life where I would have all the time in the world and some where I would have none at all. Thinking back on those, my reasons for playing games were much different. It was either to have the thrill of fun or the satisfaction of fun. Kinda like watching stand-up, which is haha fun, versus watching The Shawshank Redemption, which is entertainment fun. The familiarity aspect makes a lot of sense too, as I've noticed that I've become much less inclined to try out new games. Maybe that's a combination of long work days and the aforementioned waning quality of games in general. But something else has dawned on me. Back in 2013, I tried the newly released SimCity, which in many ways was a poor game. There was no lack of criticism about its glitch-infested launch, its tiny maps, its bogus online requirement, etc. In other ways, however, I really liked some aspects of the game, such as building customization. For instance, in previous titles, a police station would be one identical building every time you build one, with the exact same functions and parameters. In SimCity 2013, however, your police station would be a blank slate upon which additional building modules could add both functional and visual specialization. Specifically, you could add another parking lot to increase the number of patrol cars available on the street. You could also build a prison block to house more prisoners, and so on. This different approach to buildings was really enjoyable to me, but it had a huge side effect on me as well. Something that didn't enter my conscious thoughts until recently. That effect was that I'm now much less interested in city builder games that doesn't have such a mechanic. And SimCity wasn't the first or the last game to do this to me either. Before then, Dawn of War, Battle for Middle-earth and Company of Heroes all contributed to me disliking strategy games that don't have squad mechanics. More recently, Galactic Civilizations 3 exposed me to how well they implemented adjacency bonuses, and you can probably guess how that made me feel about similar games without such implementation. As such, maybe it's not that we become older and gain affinities for other skills in games that hone those skills. Maybe it's that games themselves teach us what elements we like in them, and because we're exposed to more and more games throughout our lives, we're generally no longer impressed by those nostalgia-filled platformers and shoot-em-ups that gripped us so firmly in our childhoods. Of all the possible explanations I've given for why my taste in games has changed, I want to be able to say that it's one of them, that a particular one is the culprit. But I can't, because I think it's a mix of them all. A combination of you becoming more intelligent, more mature, developing your personality, exploring new joys in life, ultimately becoming a different person. Thank you so much for watching. How has your taste in games evolved over the years? Tell me in a comment below. If you enjoyed this video, drop me a like. If you want more of these videos, do subscribe, and if you'd like to support me, you can donate on PayPal. See you next time.